To welcome you this evening. Thank you so much for coming. It looks like we've got a great turnout and an exciting evening ahead of us. My name is Jane Morton. I'm the coordinator of the Watershed Forest Alliance. And just a quick note, we've got some people filming and lots of media around, so if you're concerned about being filmed or whatever, maybe just let them know and they'll try and work this way.
We're not the RCMP.
No, I'm sorry, they were from the transition house up here and we were having a shop table, but they don't seem to be here yet. I'd like to acknowledge that we are here on traditional territory of the Nuu-chah-nulth people and note the ongoing dedication of the Nuu-chah-nulth people to work with all the ancestors to ensure the health and well-being of these lands. Tonight we will be talking about possibilities of how to protect our drinking water source, the China Creek watershed, for the future of the Alberni Valley. Many cities surrounded by privately managed forest lands like us are feeling frustrated with similar issues of who has control over our land use decisions and who must pay the price for the impacts of those decisions. In Watershed community, the Shawnigan Lake and Cowichan Valley Regional District, they have decided to take a proactive approach to the watershed protection. And tonight we have the wonderful, excellent opportunity to hear all about it. So this evening's event is co-hosted by our MLA Scott Fraser and the Watershed Forest Alliance. We are fortunate to have some wonderful lineup of speakers, which I'm sure you're anxious to hear from. So to begin with, we have MLA Scott Fraser, who's been working with us for years, and hopefully for many more years actually. Oh, I think so, Scott, you're awesome. Then we'll hear from Bruce Fraser, the outgoing director of Shawnigan Lake on the Cowichan Valley Regional District Board with his community story. And finally, before opening up the mic to questions and comments, Sarah Thomas from the Watershed Forest Alliance will give a short timeline of discussions that have been happening in the Alberni Valley. So it is my pleasure to invite our MLA Scott Fraser to come and talk to us and fill us on the whole situation of why we are where we are.
Thank you, everyone. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Sishat and Hookachesset First Nations, the traditional territory of this beautiful valley. I've been MLA since 2005. So I've been involved one way or another on these issues since 2005. And when I got elected, I didn't know anything about any of this. So previous to that election, 2003 and 4, there was a change to the tree farm license system here in the valley, in Central Island. And prior to that, back in the 80s, McMillan Blodell at the time, they had negotiations with the provincial government at the time. They placed their private land holdings into the tree farm license, TFL 44. And there's a cost to doing that, quite a cost, because that private land is private land. You can pretty much do what you want with it. So the idea the government had was that we put it into the tree farm license system. All tree farm licenses, most of them are compendium of private and public land. So those lands would all be managed in the same way, the forest forever idea, so that we would have a forest and forest industry and jobs forever. So managing it under that routine through the tree farm license system. And at the time, McMillan Blodell agreed to put the land in. They were given consideration, in other words, payment for putting those lands, fettering them by putting them under the control of the public tree farm license system. And the payment was forest, public forest that was already within the tree farm license. Now that they were given essentially a monopoly on that resource, which they utilized. And they made an awful lot of money on, which is great. And we saw a lot of jobs in the valley because of it. It was a good time for us here. And in 1990, move forward to 1999, then Weyerhaeuser, which was the new company that took over the assets and the benefits that McMillan Blodell had, they asked to have the land, all of their private land removed from the tree farm license. Now the ministry staff at the time, I was given brown paper envelope, so I saw the senior ministry position on that. The senior experts in the Ministry of Forests said, don't do it. So the then Minister Mike DeYoung, who's now he's in cabinet, he's the government house leader and he's also the finance minister. He was the Minister of Forest at the time. His own staff said, don't do it, because it will be to the detriment of the people of the Alberni Valley, of the industry, of the workers, and of the environment. So, but the last don't do it was, don't do it because it'll be cost prohibitive. Weyerhaeuser would have to pay back all of the consideration that they got and they utilized by having access to the public forests within TFL 44. That was, so they'd already utilized that and made a lot of money. Hundreds of millions, maybe billions. I couldn't get the Auditor General to figure that out, but it's a large number. So, of course, if the deal was you put your land in here forever in perpetuity, and we're going to pay you this, the land, the trees, public trees you get, if then a few years later you want to take all your private land out, largely untouched, if you're going to do that, you'd have to pay back what you got on the other side. It's a quid pro quo. So that's what the ministry staff said. So Minister DeYoung at the time said, okay, well, we'll waive all requirements of Weyerhaeuser to pay back anything. They don't have to pay back a dime, and here's the land, here's your land outside of the tree farm license, unfettered. That was 2004. And so we lost all control of TFL, of the lands that were previously to be managed in perpetuity, for us, for the public. Now, there were some stipulations, few stipulations. One was the land shouldn't be gated if there were traditional roads that people use for hunting and fishing and recreating and stuff like that. Well, I've had a number of problems dealing with that. Gates have been closed, they've been put up. So sometimes it's safety reasons, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just restricting people against the rules that were put in place. But so I had some gates opened over the years that were closed, but had some success with that. But one of the other stipulations was a letter of agreement, which I have here, and it was signed between the government at the time, 2004, and it was an agreement for the protection of, in this case it was the ungulate winter ranges, critical winter ranges, and the wildlife habitat areas that were already established in the region in TFL 44. So there was an acknowledgement by then Weyerhaeuser and by the government that, look, government scientists have figured out we can't lose these critical ranges and these wildlife habitat areas. They're too important. And they are critical ranges for ungulates too, for Roosevelt elk, black-tailed deer, that sort of thing. We've got experts, local experts in the room here that have taught me some of this stuff because I didn't know anything about it at the time. And so the memorandum was signed, and it basically says the agreement is a statement of intent on the part of the parties to support Weyerhaeuser's planning process for development of long-term protection of critical habitat. The goal of the process is to develop and implement protection measures to maintain grandfathered ungulate winter ranges and wildlife habitat areas while facilitating the removal of all Schedule A lands from TFL 44. So we're not talking a lot of land, it's like 2,400 hectares, but critical hectares. Not a big deal compared to, it was 80,000 hectares that were removed and given to Weyerhaeuser. Now that's spun off, Weyerhaeuser is no longer here. Island Timberlands has control of that land now. It's a private managed forest land company. And so, but we fast forwarded, this land is not protected. This land is being cut. The ungulate winter ranges in this valley, the critical ranges are being decimated. And we have a lot of values that need to work hand in hand with forest companies in this. And that should be, in my opinion, what should be happening. It was happening with TFL 44 when we had everything within that range. The public had stronger controls of this. It was a public tree farm license, so there were options open to the public and to the local governments. But in 2004, they brought in a new law that coincided with the removal of these lands. The Private Managed Forest Land Act at the time, I think it was Section 20. It actually takes away the ability of local governments to use any of their tools, zoning, community planning, growth strategies, any of those things that apply to every other landowner do not apply here. The government can do, they have no say over anything. So the values I'm talking about, we're talking about water here, watershed, water supply. I would submit it's way more than that. The air shed, our air quality. There's a lot of burning happening up in the higher ridges up here. I've seen it smoldering for days, if not weeks, if not months. And we have problems, we all know that. So there's watershed, water quality, airshed, air quality. We've got issues around viewscapes, scenic corridors, wildlife corridors I've already mentioned, recreational areas. There's a whole bunch of values that are important to future generations of this place. It's not just about quality of life, but it is. It's about our ability to diversify the economy. It's about finding ways to attract people to the area, attracting business, attracting people to retire here. It's all of those things. And we've got a lot of newly elected people, some people that were elected before too, in this room, and I'm so thankful for that, because if your options are severely limited because of a government decision that was made in a very poor decision against the ministry's own scientists and own experts. And so, luckily, a lot of people in this valley have stepped forward and said, whoa, we got to slow this down before it's too late. We have to take some control of the resource and of the region that we need. This is our community. And a number of issues have happened in the last couple of years that have raised other concerns for me. There was that terrible landslide incident in Washington State. There's been a lot of work being done on that to try to figure out why it happened. But some of that, the forestry on the high country above that slide zone, the unstable slope, was not permitted for a while. Somehow, I still haven't quite got the answer, it was allowed. And subsequent to that, we saw a devastating landslide. It killed a lot of people, wiped out a small town. So we do have unstable slope areas in the old growth areas on the high country known as McLaughlin Ridge. And that area it's being taken down. It's being impacted. I have asked to find out who signed off on this? Which forester signed off on this? And I'll ask you, I'll just explain that for a second. If you're going to do a forestry plan and actually do active forestry, I mean, there are regulations about this. You have to have a professional forester sign off on this stuff. At one point, a number of years ago, on the Beauforts, it was Timber West was doing a big cut on the Beauforts, very steep terrain. There was a lot of damage to some people's property down below, erosional damage subsequent to the cut, and you know, we couldn't get anywhere with that, and the property owners were irate, and I don't blame them. Eventually, there was a complaint put in to the Professional Foresters the association that they're responsible for, that's responsible for their members, about whoever signed off on that needs to be held accountable. So at some point, they got back to us locally here and said, well, actually, you don't really have anyone to blame here because nobody signed off on it. So we had nobody sign off on a forestry operation in the Beauforts that did damage to property, to the log train trail, to streams, to salmon-bearing streams, and there was nobody responsible. And according to the association, that seemed okay. So nobody to blame. But you can't do forestry unless you got that done. So I've asked for that. I have been refused. We in the valley have asked for, where are the wildlife plans for this area that deal with the issues in this memorandum, that deal with, we've got whole volumes of decades of work done by government scientists, taxpayer-paid government scientists, that said what should happen and what should not happen as far as protecting some of these key wildlife zones and ungulate winter ranges. And that's just been dismissed, and we're moved on, and they're cutting these lands. And the spirit and intent of the letter of agreement signed by government, by the province, and by Weyerhaeuser appears to be worthless, because meeting with the minister, multiple meetings with the minister, have said he's not done a thing. And I am on good terms with Minister Thompson, but on this issue I'm in his face way too much. And they're not doing anything. You talk to the senior staff, again, in the ministry, and they go, well, we haven't been able to get a wildlife plan either. So, I mean, I can't get it. I'm just an MLA. Ministry officials can't get it. I mean, I don't know who else can, but something is wrong when we have no ability to have any control or say on what happens in our valley. And I'm just going to leave it there.
Thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate that. I'm going to ask Jane Armstrong to come forward, please, from the Watershed Forest Alliance to introduce our next guest.
It's my privilege to introduce to you our keynote speaker for tonight, Bruce Fraser. Bruce is the past Shawnigan Lake Director on the Cowichan Valley Regional District. He has spent time all over British Columbia and received his doctorate at UBC. An ecologist by training, he has worked extensively as an educator, government official, and consultant on issues from land use planning to community economic development and environmental conflict resolution. He is a past president of both Selkirk College in Castlegar and Malaspina College in Nanaimo. He spent 5 years with the provincial government as executive director of post-secondary education, responsible for development of programs in community colleges and institutes in the province. As special consultant on public involvement for the BC Forest Service, he developed public involvement programs dealing with forest practice issues throughout the province, from Crescent Watershed to the islands of Haida Gwaii. He chaired the Forest Practices Board and has volunteered with the CDRD Environmental Commission and the Cowichan Water Board. Most recently, Bruce has been the Shawnigan Lake Director for the Cowichan Valley Regional District and has been spearheading multi-party collaboration for watershed planning and working to establish the Shawnigan Basin Authority in Shawnigan Lake. We welcome Bruce Fraser.
So is it great to be introduced with all the things that are past. I know that there are a number of elected people who are just in that zone between being elected and being sworn in. I met Mayor Mike. Who else is in the audience that's a recently elected person? Okay, well, I sympathize with you because just you're in that zone of being elected but not being sworn in yet. And I'm in that zone of being 3 or 4 days from being sworn out. And that will be a great change from being sworn at, which you're about to experience over the next 4 years. So I wish you the best with that. And I wish it were the case that Scott's rendition of the experience in the Alberni Valley was different from what I've heard all around this province, and in particular in my home watershed at Shawnigan Lake. So what I'm going to talk about this evening is a rendition of how we're approaching the same kinds of problems that you're approaching. And so in the Shawnigan drainage, we have the classic footprint problem. The larger scale climate change is causing a shift in the way that our weather patterns happen over the course of a year. Summer droughts, winter rain, which is the normal pattern on the east coast of Vancouver Island, is being accentuated with greater droughts and greater rainstorms in the middle of winter, which puts more pressure on the landscape, on the forests, on the slopes, on the streams, the wetlands. We're a heavily industrialized basin because a good deal of it is private managed forest land, which is being cut on an industrial basis based upon a rotation age and then clear cut in the usual industrial fashion. And that's happening without regard for cumulative impact on the watershed, which are rising from gravel pits, from recreation areas, from increased habitation. And so that Shawnigan as a basin is feeling that human footprint from everything from climate change to gravel pits. And the most recent insult to our interests is a proposal for a stone quarry once emptied, to be turned into a repository for contaminated soils. So we have a Ministry of Environment that has just issued a permit to allow contaminated soils in the headwaters of Shawnigan, and that is being contested by the public. The Residents Association in the regional district have put approximately $1 million of public money into fighting that at the Environmental Appeal Board, and we're waiting for that shoe to drop any day now, which will be a decision to either uphold that permit or to deny it, which will probably just put us back in the courtroom in either case. So the basin is not only under threat from all kinds of different human footprint pressures, but it's also highly fragmented in terms of jurisdiction, something you've also appreciated. We probably have 14 different agencies that have a piece of jurisdiction, and it's wonderfully convoluted. So the Ministry of Health is involved, the RCMP are involved, Inland Waters and Fisheries and Oceans, the Department of Environment, and the CVRD. For Shawnigan Lake, the province owns the water, and Timber West owns the bottom of the lake. The road ends around the lake that publicly lead to it are owned by the Ministry of Highways. And so unlike Port Alberni, where you have a municipal council that actually has a municipality to work with, Shawnigan is an electoral area, so that the capacity to intervene on any of these numerous jurisdictions is very limited. So we were faced with a different kind of problem of how to bring together owners of private land, the many federal, provincial, and local government agencies, the businesses of the village, the citizens of the area, and the people with all kinds of varied interests. So the first attempt we made was to try to follow the early days of the Cowichan Watershed Board, which was a roundtable effort of bringing all the interested parties around the table to say, what do we need to do in this watershed, and how can we collectively collaborate to do it? Those were the days in which the government agencies involved had money and had staff. And so they worked to produce a watershed master plan, which is still being worked out and actually being actively worked upon. But in Shawnigan, we were faced with attempting to put a round table together with similar parties to see if we couldn't recreate the same kind of collaborative public effort at the watershed scale. So we started our first attempt to get a round table together. We invited all the agencies to come, and nobody did. We had one forest company, and we had the CVRD, and none of the responsible government agencies could find time to join us for our sessions. And so what we began to find is that the agencies of senior government managed to hold on to their jurisdictions, but didn't have the capacity to exercise them. Neither the funds, nor the staff, nor perhaps the inclination. That's not a comment on the individuals left in those agencies. Most of them are now suffering from the lack of resources to do the job that they would like to do. So it's not about that. It's about the fact that our senior governments have basically retreated from the field in so many cases, leaving us with a damaged environment and too little control to do anything about it. So we moved on from that. We said, okay, the roundtable isn't going to work because nobody comes, so we need to get more organized. We created what is called the Shawnigan Basin Society, which is a registered NGO, because there was no municipal structure. You had a single electoral area director and occasional staff support from the CVRD staff, but basically there was no civic infrastructure within Shawnigan which could tackle this kind of collaborative activity. We also needed a society because if you were going to receive funds, either from government or from private foundations, you needed to be a registered society in order to receive and account for funds. And in particular, because as an electoral area director, I had some allocation of grant and aid funds, the receiving society had to be properly incorporated in order to receive public funds. So we started them out with grants and aid of a few $1,000s a year to get them organized as a society so that they could start the process of watershed planning. We managed to not only start them out on a grant and aid basis, but we also then moved on to providing them with a secure base of public funds. We passed a public approval process to provide them with $50,000 a year as basic administrative money, which would allow them to then proceed to do the necessary research and planning effort to begin to take control of the watershed, both from an administrative point of view and a scientific research point of view. So what we found is that because the public of the area put up $50,000 of tax money directly to help the society take on its task, that it gave us tremendous leverage towards others. So when we went to foundations for help, we were asking them not for the first dollar, but for support for something that we put our own money into up front. So what happened then was that the society began to contract with reputable scientists to do the ecological work necessary to underpin watershed planning over the long run. And we approached the Real Estate Foundation of BC, which was very helpful. They kicked in another $40,000 to the community in the form of watershed detailed mapping of both the human footprint and the basic physiography of the basin, and provided us with a three-dimensional model of the watershed, which allowed people to see the exact layout of how the structure of the watershed came together. We also had help from Timber West and Coubertin, their real estate foundation or real estate arm, who supplied us probably $50,000 worth of work in putting the documentation together. So within a very short period of time, the Basin Society was able to lever in funds from outside. They managed to get a smaller grant from the BC Salmon Foundation, or Pacific Salmon Foundation, which allowed them to start foreshore restoration work on the shore of Shawnigan Lake. And that effort is now ongoing, using the leverage from locally raised tax funds to approach other sources who then can add into the scientific process. Then along came the changes to the BC Water Act, and what now called the Water Sustainability Act, which in its early promulgation promised an opportunity for local communities to have more direct say in how their watersheds were managed, and perhaps to develop watershed master plans that would then be acknowledged by government as a serious requirement for management of the watershed. We had to have a civic structure in order to be able to participate in such a thing. So we went the next step. The society created what it called the Shawnigan Basin Authority. We used that term because we wanted to make it very clear to government that we were not trying to become an advisory committee, but we wanted actual control, and that civic control was a necessity in a watershed that was as complicated as ours. So that authority is now being put into place with membership from throughout the community, including the industrial interests, the civic interests, the recreation interests, the taxpayer interests, the local government interests, so that there will be a really solid foundation of people acting as an authority within the basin to act as a catalyst for bringing whatever delegated authority can be derived from the Water Sustainability Act down to the local level, so that it actually has planning capability and decision-making capability within the basin. Now, you might ask, and you probably should, is how does a NGO-based authority actually derive any delegated authority from a provincial government? Pretty tall order. So what has happened since then is that the regional district, because it has the Cowichan Watershed Board, the Shawnigan Basin Authority, and others waiting in the wings throughout the whole regional district, has just started a process of regional water governance in which we have involved a task force of some 50 people drawn from throughout the region, from First Nations through to NGOs to the local government representatives to citizens groups, stewardship groups, with the idea that the regional government may be the only local government capability available to actually draw down responsible watershed governance from the provincial government under the Water Sustainability Act. So what we have done is to create a model of regional governance which involves direct government-to-government relationship at a council level with First Nations and with major industrial parties and other interests in the basin, in the whole regional district, with the idea that they would form a governing council, and beneath that to form whatever structures, commissions or committees or working groups that are necessary to actually do planning and to support the individual efforts at the watershed scale, like Shawnigan or like Cowichan or like Chemainus or others within the regional district. So now what you have is developing the kind of infrastructure necessary to actually take control of watershed planning, because we found it so fractured amongst privately managed forest land, amongst gravel pit owners, amongst recreational properties, amongst subdivision owners, and so on. There had to be some civic structure in order to draw these people together to be able to act collaboratively to plan for watersheds. So the structure that's now emerging is a regional council with regional capability, regional fundraising capability, supporting and coordinating the watershed groups at the watershed scale, with the authority being drawn down from government by the regional body, because it's the only local government with the clout to do it, and the only one likely to receive authorization from the provincial government. But them then supporting the NGOs and working groups at the watershed scale, which is where the horsepower needs to be applied. Because there isn't enough in the CVRD, there isn't enough in the provincial government, it's not there anymore. So it's got to be us working public members and the professionals in our community that have the skills, that have to step up to do the job. So now in Shawnigan we have a Shawnigan Basin Society that's capable of receiving and accounting and managing funds. We have a Shawnigan Basin Authority, which is the prototype for gaining management, planning control over the watershed. We also created what we called a ecological design panel, a takeoff from architectural design panels that are often used in cities for advice to city councils about the shape of their built environment. We translated into ecological language and said, let's call it an ecological design panel. So we've got experts from within the Cowichan Valley that are experts in ecological restoration, forestry, public health, and so on, that are advising the Advisory Planning Commission of the Regional District, that are advising the Basin Society, that are advising the staff of the Regional District, that will eventually advise the authority on the technical requirements of doing a plan that's actually scientifically sound. So what this all amounts to, and why I've tried to illustrate what we've done in our area, is that we spent a lot of time over the last 2 or 3 decades simply watching the decline. The decline in water quality, the decline in forest cover, the decline in visual appearance, and the loss of any kind of apparent civic control without having any institutional structure to address it. And the institutional structure that used to be there, in the form of the Forest Service, or in the form of the Ministry of Health, or others, seem to be retreating from the field, leaving us with really no civic infrastructure to address these problems as a society. So we had to recreate it. And I think that's probably what you're in the process of doing too, is you have to create an institutional structure that has official capability, that has a structure that has duration, that has funding, that has long-term and well-developed relationships with its First Nations, and that therefore has the ability to replace some of the governance structure that has evaporated while we've watched. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I'd now like to introduce Sarah Thomas from the Watershed Forest Alliance.
Thanks, Jane. So, just so you can find my slides maybe. I'm just going to speak briefly about the events that have been taking place over the past year. So just to get us going, who in this room drinks tap water? So great, and generally we have really great tap water around here. Now, who remembers or who had any experience with maybe water quality problems a few weeks ago? A few of us. And so there were many anecdotal comments and concern about water quality back when we had the major rainfall event in October. And it came up at council one night when Wendy Kerr mentioned that she had seen decreased water quality at her house, and there was kind of nods of agreement in the room. And it also came up at ADSS, I know, where sediment had been found in toilet bowls, and so there was concern about what was coming out of the taps. So I don't know if there's any connection, but what I do know is that a large area above Bainbridge Lake was also logged last year, and this is the first major rainfall event we've had since then. So again, in this case specifically, we don't know if there's a direct correlation, but it's interesting to see the trends. So as you see in this slide here, healthy forests are known to provide ecosystem services such as the ability of the forest to hold water and to let it out slowly over time. And it is not a coincidence that in the past, Port Alberni has been known for having really high water quality, and still to this day we rely on the forest floor to filter our water. The Alberni Valley is also the greenest valley near here and contains some of the highest value old growth forests remaining in this area. So now I'm just going to go through a brief timeline of what's kind of been going on in the background since February. So in February, a research document states that Island Timberlands has put economics before environment and public interest, which they are a forest company. But the key question was, please show us the science and the evidence to support that this is not going to negatively impact the water for the city. This was sent to the professional foresters, as Scott had mentioned. In March, after emails that Island Timberlands said that it would only meet with one Watershed Forest representative, a member of the BC Teachers Federation Pension Committee, as well as Jane Warden and Jane Armstrong from the Watershed Forest Alliance, and a retired Ministry of Environment biologist met with Island Timberlands to talk about these issues, and the answers to their key questions was it's confidential, as Scott said. And so in the following months, BC Teachers Federation passed a resolution calling for the protection of forest lands around Cathedral Grove. Scott Fraser also sent a letter to Island Timberlands asking which professional foresters signed off on the China Creek Ridge block. There was no answer there. Ian Thomas emailed Island Timberlands regarding the wildlife management plan, which we had been told would be revealed in 50 to 90 days. Again, months later, no answer. In July, aerial photos were taken and revealed significant logging in old growth on McLaughlin Ridge. And on that basis, it was clear that we need a pause in harvesting so that we can have this conversation about watershed protection. On August 11th, the City of Port Alberni passed a motion to sign on to the letter calling for a pause in logging in McLaughlin Ridge and other high-value old-growth forests in this region. and the city also called for a meeting with the ministry, the Watershed Forest Alliance, and Island Timberlands to discuss watershed protection. On August 13th, the city sent a letter to Island Timberlands and the ministry indicating this request and inviting them to a meeting. On August 22nd, the Watershed Forest Alliance and the Ancient Forest Alliance met with the Deputy Minister of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations and other ministry staff about this issue, and the ministry said, it's private land, that's the way it's going to stay. In September, the Private Managed Forest Council changed its name to the Managed Forest Council, though it is still composed of representatives from the private companies and deals exclusively with issues pertaining to private lands, private forest lands. October 6th, Scott Fraser again wrote to the Managed Forest Council over concern about the extensive harvest activity on the steep slopes of McLaughlin Ridge. And then on the 23rd, in response to earlier correspondence, the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations sent a response basically shutting the door to conversation. Then on the 27th, Scott Fraser received his response from the Managed Forest Council, which again suggested that only second growth forests were being cut, and there was, despite the fact that we have unequivocal evidence that in fact old growth forests are also being cut in the area. So we continue to try and have a conversation with them and see what's up with that. On November 3rd, the City of Port Alberni organized this meeting with the city staff, councillors, the Watershed Forest Alliance, representatives from the ministry, as well as ACRD directors, and invited Island Timberlands, though Island Timberlands did not participate. The official line was on holidays. So where to next? It's time that we really need to get a real conversation going about watershed protection and see what can be done to ensure that this fragmentation of control, as Bruce discussed, can be addressed, and that the taxpayers are not the ones left to pay the price of ever-increasing infrastructure costs to buy new treatment plants where the natural systems fail to function as they have in the past. So we, as taxpayers, are currently on the hook for a $4 million treatment plant required by island health regulations, and if turbidity or dirt in the water increases too much, the next step is to buy a $3 million filtration plant. So, thanks to all of our work on the colleagues of the South Island, Cowichan Valley, Shawnigan, and Victoria doing this groundbreaking work, we have other communities to look to learn from, and to help us see a way forward. Thank you.
Okay, this is the time on the agenda for people to ask questions. What we will do is, to make sure everybody can hear the question, I will ask Jane to take the mic to those who want to question, and you can direct your question to whomever you would like to answer. Okay.
I have a loud voice, so I can start.
All right, gentlemen.
Ms. Thomas, why were you continuing to deal with the Ministry of Forests when I understood that managed private forest lands are under the control of the Ministry of Ag?
So we're working with both of them. The Ministry of Forests as well as the Private Managed Forest Council. The Managed Forest Council is under the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations. And so working with both of them there. Yeah.
There is no Ministry of Forests now. It's Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations, as Sarah said. It's sort of like an Uber ministry. So when I raise concerns with the Ministry of Environment, they move me, environmental concerns, they move me to the Ministry of Forest Land and Natural Resource Operations. You know, it's hard to know where to go to, but that's the
all of the operations staff have been moved to the Forest Land and Natural Resource Operations.
So where does Ag fit in though?
Separate. It's some department, I think.
Ag and Lands is a separate department.
Yeah.
Agriculture. It's a separate ministry.
But IT are responsible to lands, to Ag, aren't they?
No.
No. So their lands have nothing to do with Ag.
Right. It's all private managed forest lands, which falls under forest.
Anybody else with a question? Wow.
I don't have so much a question as I do a comment. And I'm Jim Ross, by the way, from Vancouver Island Water Watch. I've come from the Nanaimo to support the group here. And what we're discovering is, as you have been told, everything is so broken out, we have nowhere to go. We go and we write and we scream and we yell and we do all, try the right way first, that doesn't work. It's going to take numbers of people to stand up and say, no, no more, we won't have it. Our watershed in Nanaimo is owned by Island Timberlands. Every time we get a rain event, the men that work for the city are up into the reservoir cleaning out the slides. So it is absolutely a definitive yes that cuts equal slides. They absolutely will do that. Port Alice, they had a big slide up there how many years ago? The whole side of the mountain had been clear cut. And that's why things slide. We have no forest left to hold the water into the ground and to stop the slopes from shifting. We have to stand up, people. It's going to be too late otherwise.
Thank you. Anybody else with either comment or question? Yes.
Dennis Solveig, pretty much my question is to MLA Scott Fraser.
Can you stand up and, yes, because you're at the front for people to hear.
Sorry, I thought I had a loud voice.
Face this way.
Pretty much my question is for MLA. What would be actually the next step? Obviously the minister is aware of her voice and nothing is being done. So provincially, what can be done to make sure we are heard?
I think the first step would be City Council to raise serious concerns about the issues we talked about today. And in my opinion, you know, this is my opinion, and I've held this for a long time. The removal of the ability in the Act, the Private Managed Forest Land Act, takes away the ability of local government from having any say on what happens and using any of their tools. Like, if you're going to do something on your property, there's zones in place. I mean, that's land use. That's the idea is that there's got to be compatibility with the use. So, you know, if you want to build a go-kart track next to the seniors' home, you might get, you know, shut down on that for the right reasons. So that section of the Act, I think it needs to be amended. And it actually should say the opposite. It should say local governments should be facilitated to use their tools to help inform the companies involved with these forestry activities. We have to get a voice back in. So we need to have a push from local governments that are most affected. And I don't know of one more than Port Alberni, although this is happening all over the place, as Bruce has said too. This is not, we've been losing control of our own region and our own ability to plan for the future. And that's the role of local governments. That's the role of a democratic society. And that's been taken away. So I think we should be strong on that. I think resolutions could go forward to the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities. And that would be, if they endorse, then that goes right to government from the larger group of coastal mayors and regional district directors and councillors. So that sort of pressure, you know, might have an impact on the government. Because, you know, you know, they hear me all the time. And they'll keep hearing me all the time. But, and you know, and I meet with Island Timberlands as often as I possibly can too. And I'm trying to, you know, they're a company, they're making money, the government's letting them do this, despite letters that say that maybe they shouldn't be. So the local government needs to push the province, the minister, to actually have the discussion, to acknowledge a problem.
Let me just ask, first, yes, would you like to respond? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. One of the things that we've been saying to some of our landowners in the Shawnigan is that let's take a look 30 to 50 years down the line. Right now, the basin has been extensively clear-cut logged where it was possible to do so in private managed forest land. And the Crown land is being allocated out to First Nations who are largely interested, at least in first ownership, to logging. So we're looking at probably 100% of our watershed being turned into short rotation logging systems, industrial scale or woodlot scale, but both with the idea of going into short rotation managed forest, which is not compatible with the long-term capability of the forest hydrologically. So the proposition that we've been putting forward is, let's think next rotation 30 to 40 years down the line, when the impact of climate change has become even more evident, and when the demands of the public for clean water supply are even more urgent. Just think what the social license will be for industrial logging at the scale that we're currently practicing. My thought is that that will probably have long since evaporated by the time that next rotation comes around. So we need to start thinking about something that's a whole lot more creative about the way that the landscape is being used. We need to have a system in which there is a longer rotation forest, more collaboration amongst the parties so that you're not setting up a contest between being economically sound and being ecologically sound. Those two have to work together. The parties to a water supply need to work together, because the one thing that we can't forfeit as a society is access to water. If there's anything that binds us into a common interest, it's got to be water. So let's try not to set it up as a contest between economic and ecological interests. Try to find a way of making them work so that there is a social license 30 to 40 years from now for forestry activity that is ecologically sustainable, but also economically supporting to the communities in which it is occurring. That's a creative challenge, which is going to take all of us to work on. And we need to get beyond the contest language to the collaborative language to make that work, because the old methods of top-down management control through legislative authority of government departments has simply died.
Before I do a second round, I'll get whoever hasn't spoken yet. Yes, at the back.
Hi, I'm Jackie Swan. I'd like to know if you have approached the possibility of having community forests around your watershed areas and basing them around much more of an ecological forestry approach instead of a cut it and talk.
If we were Victoria or Vancouver, we'd have a neat answer to that. They already own their watersheds and therefore can manage them with water as a primary objective. In our case, we do have one patch of land that was developed, or in the process of being developed in the headwaters of Shawnigan, called the Elkington Forest, in which there is a development which has a 15% footprint on the land and an 85% 200-year long rotation forest evaluated by the Forest Stewardship Council. So it is possible to do that, and what they would determine is that the return to the private landowner who originally owned that forested parcel would be actually greater over the length of term of that work than it would be than if they cleared out today and ran. So it is possible to do those things, but it requires an entirely different mind frame to say we can develop, we can have industrial activity, but it needs to be on a rotation length that is kindly to the watershed. There's actually an example of that going on in Shawnigan now. Unfortunately, it's only a small footprint, but it happens to be in the sensitive headwaters. So we do have a living, working example of that. However, buying the whole watershed is quite beyond the tax base that we have in our community, even though it's fairly large. Shawinigan has got 8,100 people, which is the largest unincorporated population in the province. But even that wouldn't be able to afford to buy the land back, although that would be a worthy objective. And in the end, maybe communities have to own their watersheds to have the kind of control that we're talking about.
Okay, yes, was there anybody else over there before? There was another guy. Okay, go ahead.
Judy Carlson, I was just, could you explain again how you got the $40,000 to get this started?
We stole it.
Hopefully from the forest company.
If we could have found the safe, we might have done that. Actually, there are two methods for a community to raise tax funds. For a regional district, that has to be done for any new function within the regional district. It has to be done with a public approval process. There are two methods. One is called an alternate approval process, which is an unfortunate negative billing type of operation where you say, we're going to raise this funds unless you say no. And unless 10% of you say no, which would force it to a referendum or abandon, or a referendum which would be a straight vote at the time of an election. So in Shawinigan, for the $50,000 a year for the Basin Society, we went to the alternate approval process. There's something like 5,900 electors, 54 of which said no. So I think there was very solid support in the community. They recognized that work on the water absolutely was imperative. In a municipality, that would be a different approach, but it is possible for a municipality to raise funds like that. But because we have the civic structure in Port Alberni of a mayor and council, you didn't have, like us, to have to create an alternative to that because we didn't have one in an electoral area. So you already have the machinery. You don't need to probably fund another set of machinery in order to do the job. Just have a council that's willing to do it.
Anyone else? Comments or questions?
Oh, I have a quick question about the Water Sustainability Act. So has it been proclaimed? And is there any, does it have any teeth?
Doesn't have the regs yet.
It's been through the legislature, so it's I believe it's in place. I think it's.
The regulations are being developed over the next 5 years, and so there's still time. Like some of these pieces are still getting worked out exactly how the pieces are going to go, but the overarching legislation and the skeleton of the body is already in place and has been passed through the legislature in March. I believe it was March. And it does have a provision in place. It's enabling legislation, but it does have a provision in place for enabling watershed entities to do some of this work. And so that's kind of one, I think, of the possible pilot projects for under that regulation might be, there's some talk that there might be some portion up there in Cowichan. But yeah, so it does, it's, you know, the new Water Act has been called one of the most progressive pieces of legislation that's been passed in the past 10 years. There's, you know, you can call it whatever you like. Some people say you could do more. There's still lots to be worked out, and a lot of that's going to be worked out in the next 5 years as we figure out and hammer out the regulations.
Yes, in the back of the room.
Yeah, Gary Swan. I happen to be the guy that signed the complaint to the Registered Professional Forest on the landslide out on Wayne Crowley's place. If you ever happen to get out there, I mean, there's boulders and it's like acres of it, right? But anyhow, we got the answer back, and they did the whole dog and pony show. They brought people here and they interviewed people that were familiar with the event. And the answer was, well, nobody signed it. Nobody signed exactly as Scott had indicated. No professional forester had signed it. So there's nothing we can do. But what kind of a professional association is that? Because it is actually part of the Forestry Act that all activities have to be signed off on, right? So, I mean, it's malpractice, basically, I think you could probably say. And the doctor was getting away with it. We wouldn't stand for that for very long, right? But this is equally as important, probably, as you reckon kind of a vital life support thing. So I would aim a few shots at the registered professional foresters in this community. How come their association turns a blind eye to this type of activity? It degrades their professional standing, in my opinion. Right? Now, whether they want to hear that or not, but that's the actual fact. Right? They are, they should be liable, stand up liable for something that they do like that. Right? But it's not.
Gary, you forget the forester that got the job was the one that answered the question, what cut did you have in mind?
Yeah.
Okay, one last call. Any more questions or comments? Not seeing any. It's my job to do two things tonight, is to talk just a little bit about where we're at as the Watershed Forest Alliance. And one of the key things we have been asking for at the provincial level, at the municipal level, the ACRD, and certainly in every attempt that we've been able to, in terms of meetings and letters coming to Timberlands, is we need a pause in the logging. If we don't get a pause in the logging, there won't be much to talk about in terms of all the ideas we've heard today about how we can come together as a community and try and develop a long-term watershed plan. There's nobody here who also doesn't recognize the degree to which climate change is affecting us. We're seeing longer, hotter, drier summers. You talk to the farmers around here, and I've heard Gary say he's changed his planting calendar because the winters are longer and rainier and the fall's getting longer. There's all sorts of reasons why we have to start action now. But we know, even from the slides and the aerial photographs that we took last summer, that in fact more logging has gone on this fall up in the watershed. And so far we have had no meaningful discussion with Island Timberlands about pausing rather than talking about logging. So we do need to get a pause, and so we can come together. In terms of helping send the message to Island Timberlands, we have a number of Christmas cards. So we're going to be passing those out, and I want to acknowledge that there are several people here from Island Timberlands tonight, and we have a box for them at the back of the room. So we'll pass out the Christmas cards. You can sign them and stick them in the box, and they're welcome to take them back when they go. We also have other boxes that you can drop your card in. One is to the City of Port Alberta, just to say, you know, we need to continue with trying to find a way to manage our watershed with private control, but yet we have public accountability by the city for the water that they supply to us, but they have no control over what happens in the watershed. We need to change that. So I'll ask people to pass out the cards to you, and thank you all so much for coming out tonight. We're hoping in January to get going on a number of plans that we have and work to the best that we can with the public, the city, other non-governmental organizations, and as well as the ACRD in trying to help develop a way forward. With that, I want to thank so much for Bruce Fraser coming up on this awful night, and others that came from outside of Port Alberta, and our MLA who got permission to leave the house to come.
I gotta go right back.
Yeah, long day. And especially a warm welcome to all of the municipal elected councillors, mayor-elect, ACRDRC, who have come up. So thank you very much, and please feel welcome to help yourself to the tea, cookies, anything else. Thank you.